I first came to China in January of 1989, so literally 30 years ago. I was invited by Dr. Song Jian, who at that time was the director of Gujiakuwei, the State Science and Technology Commission. According to the history at that time, reform had, of course, begun in 1978 and gone through the 80s. But the science industries were actually behind other areas, obviously behind rural reform, but even behind a lot of industrial reform. And the science industry was looking for ways to reform. And I was trained as a scientist. My doctorate, PhD, is in neuroscience, brain research, and I was an investment banker. And so I was one of a number of people who were invited to come to China. And that is to experiment with ideas on a limited basis, and indeed the limited basis has often been geographically limited, and to see how it works. We saw that at the very beginning with the special economic zones in Shenzhen, in Guangdong province in particular, and they were literally walled off with, I think, barbed wire and maybe dogs in order to be sure that whatever's happening there wouldn't, if it's bad, wouldn't infect the whole country. And then, obviously, after a few years, people recognized how good it was, and it began to spread ultimately over the whole country. We see an example of that in recent times with the special trade zones. Originally, it was in Shanghai, the China pilot, it was called a pilot, a free trade zone in Shanghai. Going forward, you have to look at what are the critical areas of reform, and being able to unleash the creative dynamism of the Chinese people, particularly the knowledge creators, primarily maybe in science and technology, but also in all other areas of management systems that need to occur. I mean, that's the key. President Xi today, again, reaffirmed that innovation is the most essential part of where we are today. And we have to look and see how it works. The structural guidelines for the country are clear in terms of maintaining the socialism with Chinese characteristics, the primacy of the party. And indeed, that's been strengthened. It's been strengthening over the last years since President Xi took office. Increasing role of the party was made clear again today. Most people recognize that the reform is needed, but generally it's the question of the speed and the timing. And so there are some fundamental issues in the degree of openness of markets in China. There's two kinds of openness: the openness to private companies within China, Chinese companies, and the second openness is open to foreign companies. How much do you have of that? That's number one. Number two, obviously intellectual property protection is very important. And third, and arguably the most sensitive, is the government support of state-owned enterprises, new technology, subsidies, etc. These are very complex subjects, beyond the scope of a short commentary.